Thank you. We're moving to policy 6010. Mr. Lubley and Ms. Babenko.
Good evening, Chair Cotroneo, board members, Dr. Martirano, and Deputy Superintendent Turner-Little. I am Dan Lubley, Director of Capital Planning and Construction and co-chair for Policy 6010, School Attendance Area Review Committee, along with our other co-chair, Ms. Jennifer Babenko, Planning Specialist in the Office of School Planning. We are here this evening to seek action for Policy 6010. There have been additional reviews and changes since the board report in October, as indicated in the action report provided for this evening. The key highlights include comments at the board meeting and considered and implemented changes based on those comments. Simplified considerations in Section B, items for consideration during boundary adjustment process for consistency and flexibility. Remove the qualifying date requirement for the IEP exemption consideration. Clarified text at certain locations. Examples are others and interested residents. Updated definitions for inclusive. Provided consideration for diverse representation for AAC membership. Requested additional policy review by outside counsel. Staff reached out to outside counsel for additional feedback. Many changes were advised and accepted. Various updates for minor grammar improvements and for clarification of text. Rewrote Section C.9 regarding the Maryland Educational Code 4-109.1 for simplicity and ease of use. Simplified the definition of diversity and equitable to improve relevance to this specific policy. Updated Section 4 of the implementation procedures regarding appeals. Also, there was updated language for consistency, simplicity, and clarity. We removed the goal of 90 to 100% for capacity utilization, as it always causes confusion in comparison to the prompt of 90 to 110% target utilization. Simplified considerations under demographic characteristics for student population. Clarification that should a building be deemed unusable, 12th graders will be impacted by boundary changes. Within the implementation procedures, the following has been added by outside counsel. Text clarification for grammar and wording. Addition of if convened regarding language for the AAC. Clarified the time for appeals from the board final action. It is the recommendation that the board approve the modified policy 6010 school attendance area effective immediately. Ms. Babenko, Dr. Varlock, and I are here to assist. We also have Mr. Tim Rogers, manager of school planning virtually, and our outside counsel, Ms. Judith Bresler, I hope she is still available, was also on virtually to assist with any questions that you may have to her comments.
Thank you very much. We'll start with questions. I just lost my screen. Dr. Liu?
Well, actually, I don't have questions, but I have some comments. I provided some suggested ideas to the team, so I believe you already received it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So I will read some of the amendment, because if our colleagues agree, then we don't need a vote. But if we don't have consensus, then we can make a motion. So the first one amendment is page 1112 about definition U. That is about definition of target utilization. So here I changed 110% to 100%. So it reads target utilization, enrollment between 90 and 100 utilization percent of the utilization of the program capacity of a permanent school facility as a desired outcome. So here I want to make it clear that the target utilization is a desired outcome. We don't want any school to be overcrowded. So it's between 90 and 100%. But we also want to differentiate between it and also the trigger of school redistricting. So I also have page 2 of 12, that's 8.3 to read school attendance area projections are well above the target utilization. For instance, example, projections greater than 110% and available capacity exists. So basically here we're distinguishing two concepts. One is our desired outcome, which is target utilization. The other one is a trigger of the potential redistricting. For example, greater 110% and available capacity exists. So here it can reduce the confusion. And also we saw emails from the committee members because they work so hard and they want to address that. We don't want overcrowding schools. 110% is not our target. Our desired outcome is 90 to 100%. So I want to make that amendment, and also I want to see whether we have consent, but I will continue, and then I will see whether we can have consent. The second one is about page 2 of 12. B.1.E, so just for consistency, now it read location of regional programs. That's pretty straightforward. The third one is page 8 of 12. It's about definition B, attendance area committee. Because I think it's very important that the committee members need to be representative of the county diverse community and geographical area. And also I think the AAC can report to the superintendent and the board so we can hear the voice from the committee members. So now here is the amended word. Attendance area committee, AAC, committee composed of community members appointed by the superintendent and the board to provide feedback to the superintendent and the board on attendance area adjustment considerations. AAC members need to be representative of the county diverse population and geographical area. Okay. The next one, about page 9 of 12, definition F, diversity. I really like the original one, so I want you to restore to the previous version. It's more inclusive, and it has the spirit of accepting and respecting. So I really like the original word. And the next one is about page 4 of 12, C.4. That is because in the implementation, I detect a discrepancy about when superintendent present his report. It says 14 months before implementation of the plan. But when it comes back, if 14 months before the end of August, it's supposed to be June, the end of June instead of August. So here, I just add that language. So now it's to read, the superintendent will submit to the board the superintendent's proposed attendance area adjustment plan, parentheses, by the end of June, i.e. at least 14 months before implementation of attendance area adjustment, parentheses, which include data on each of the factors in section 3.b to the extent reliable measures can be obtained. So basically the language I add was the one in the parentheses, all the rest are the same. Yeah. So I will stop here to see whether I can have consensus from my colleagues. Thank you.
Mr. Lubley.
Yes, Ms. Cotrunia, I would like to ask, first of all, Dr. Liu, thank you very much for providing your thoughts and your motions ahead of time so that we would be able to look at them. So I'd like to ask Chair Cotrunia, would you like to go through each one for the conversation?
Yes, I was going to suggest that each one.
Great, thank you very much. We can start from the back and kind of work its way forward. Just as a piece of clarification on the implementation procedures, the way that we looked at it, there are actually two factors of why we had it starting in July and August. Is one, while August is typically when school starts, it really is the last weeks of August. So the first full month of school is typically September. And we have seen in recent years that can fluctuate. So that's why we started with the 0 month as September, not August. The second factor is an item that was brought up during the actual committee meetings, is the schedule was looked at by the committee and was looked to extend. And a large concern that was expressed by the committee is trying not to have that beginning portion during the summer when a lot of families are out on vacation. So we tried to make sure that it was kept close to where it currently is in July and August, and closer to the school year when families can actually be back to participate in the presentation of the superintendent's proposal.
I see. So just want to make sure I understand you correctly. So basically you want to give family times to be able to participate. But right now, because we have the live stream and then we have this virtual component available? Do you think that could be an issue? Because when people travel, they can still be able to watch it online, and if they cannot attend the live stream, they can also watch it at a later period of time. Because when I see the 14 months, I think it probably can give us sufficient time to work, because I remember 2019, the board only has 3 months to work on this, and I think it was really rushed at the end because there was no time for middle school and elementary school. So I think this additional 2 months can give us more time, and also that's in agreement with the 14 months before the implementation, right? Because if the school year starts the end of August, if it's presented to the board the end of June, that's 14 months. Regardless of whether school starts in late August or early July, because that's only probably 1 week difference, it's still 14 months, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Because if it is presented by the end of August, then we only have 12 months, I'm sorry. Then I see that the board has been really rushed. And I think it also put lots of pressure on the community. And right now, because we have this virtual option for public hearing, they can testify virtually, so they can participate.
Yes, ma'am. I think the virtual abilities that we have been going through do have some benefits to it, and that is one that we could see. So this is just a consideration that we wanted to bring to the board as an item that was mentioned in the committee meetings. Obviously, the board would need to discuss this slightly. We all know as we go through the spring sessions, there's a lot of things that are going on specifically as you look into redistricting years, but then you also have the operating and capital budgets. So there's a lot of run. So a lot of times that June is seen as a decompression. So it's again, it's not that it can't happen. It is just a consideration that the Board of Education would need to discuss.
Mr. Banyas, do you have a comment on this particular change?
I had a question about the 90 to 110, but I think that's...
Okay, we'll do it separately. Does any of my colleagues have comment on this particular suggestion for amendment by Dr. Liu? Dr. Wu.
So, Chair Coutinho, I think I have a suggestion. How about, because I think a lot of motions are great motions, how about we go motion by motion, have a vote?
Yeah, that's
have
what
a
we're
clear
doing.
understanding, right? Then
So we're
for
discussing.
something which has, if we don't have consensus, we just keep it there. But for some other, if there's a consensus, let's vote on that and then come back to the more complicated one.
Okay, so for this particular one, do you have comment on
For this one,
the
I want to make a
timeframe?
comment. I think if we can move it a little earlier, that definitely give us, if you can present to the board in June or late June or July, then there are 2 summer sessions, people have time to look at that. And because if you present on in September or August, right, then we need to discuss that very soon. I think that leaves very little time to the community. I just wonder whether you can handle that if they say you move that presentation to before the summer. Can you handle that?
Thank you for bringing that up. I'd like to go to Ms. Bubenko. She brought up exactly that point.
If we're still going to have a feasibility study, which is typically in June, I mean, we work really hard to get that done by June. Maybe we could scoot it up a little bit, but we couldn't feasibly get the feasibility study done in June, and then within that same month, then turn around and do enough public feedback for the superintendent in order for him to do a recommendation to the board. That's very, very tight.
So when will you be able to, when do you start to prepare for the feasibility study?
We work on the student enrollment projections through February, and maybe any QC into March if that's depending on how things are going. And then from March and April, we work on the feasibility study, and it goes through all the work that goes to put into it, and then of course it gets circulated around and with staff to finalize it. So
I see. Thank you.
I was
going to bring up the feasibility study. In a lot of ways, what's in the feasibility study, especially a year that you're going to recommend, because the feasibility study is where you recommend whether there should be redistricting or not. I mean, there's recommendations in that. So how does that parlay into the plan, the recommendations of the superintendent? Because there's a lot of similarities. Some of our feasibility studies have possibilities for boundary line adjustments within the feasibility study.
Yeah, it's kind of the jumping off point. So it's the first time we present the student enrollment projections so everyone can see the enrollment projections, and we talk about needs. So we look at schools that are under and over the target utilization, and we look at a variety of strategies, including boundary line adjustments in that document. And then we put that out and to you all and to the community, and that's when we start getting feedback for the superintendent so that he can hear the community and how they're reacting to the needs and the strategies that we present in that document. And then he moves on, of course, with the attendance area committee, getting a recommendation from that group as well, and then develops his own recommendation.
So to clarify, so what people are aware, the feasibility study already gets presented in June, and the community has the opportunity to weigh in on the feasibility study and the boundary line adjustment suggestions that are in that feasibility study.
From that starting point.
So
yes,
that
ma'am.
really starts it, right there, the feasibility
ma'am.
study. And so to move the official recommendations of the superintendent right on top of the feasibility study is kind of counterproductive. Am I right on this? Like, I think it's I want as much time as possible too, but I'm just thinking process-wise, we have to count the feasibility study as part of the process, and that starts us. So am I on the right? So
Yes, you are.
I understand now that we have these virtual options and people can do public, I understand maybe we don't need to wait till end of August, but what is a reasonable timeframe in between the feasibility study and the recommendation to allow allow an ability to present a good plan, a well thought out plan, but also allow the community to give feedback in advance of presenting that plan. So
Sure, I believe that's why we had it July/August.
Right.
So that if at all possible.
Dr. Liu, you look like you're really anxious to.
I really have a question about
Okay.
that one, because that's the section E, calendar year 2. It says June/July. But it says that duration of this step is 1 month and occurs 15 months before implementation of attendance area adjustment. So I did the back calculation. If the school starts the end of August, 15 months before that is the end of May. And if the school starts early September, 15 months before that is early June. Because it's 1 month instead of 2 months, so I think it could happen. That process happened in May, and feasibility presented to us either the end of May or early September. So I think for that one, we don't need 2 months, because when I look at the document, for consistent reasons, when it has 2 months, it has, let's say, June or July. But 1 month, I don't think we need 2 months, because for this particular item, it's only 1 month.
Well,
So in the email I wrote, you can see, I made a suggestion because I saw there's discrepancy. So I back calculated to make sure I understand the time frame. So to me, it should happen in May, because it is 15 months before implementation of the attendance area adjustment. It completes the end of May. Yeah, so then if you have the feasibility study the end of May, and then you have the superintendent present to us 14 months before, because that is based on the timeline, it's set in the revised version, right? So it has 15 months, 14 months. I think it makes sense. Just I saw discrepancy, so I back calculate.
And I appreciate what you're pointing out and how you've calculated it back. Again, what is in the current draft that is in front of you was based off of the 0 month of September.
Yeah, that is also okay. I can change that to, let's say, by the early June. That's fine, because there's only 1 week difference. There's not much difference, but there is a difference between early May and early June, but there's not much difference between the end of May and early June.
Understand. I want to add just into the factor here is I understand what you're looking at here, which is basically calendar math as we're working back. What we do have to take into account is the actual process that it takes. We have talked about this in Office of School Planning on several other items of how can we speed things up. And unfortunately, when all of this is kind of based off of the projections are the point that is very difficult to speed up because a lot of that information comes from outside sources, which we do not control. Once that comes in, there is a process that happens to actually get those projections to start creating recommendations. Once that can actually happen, which right now the feasibility study is presented in June, whether it's in the middle, beginning of June, it's in June at the moment based off of the current process. Once we get out of looking at just the calendar math, we have to start to take into consideration, as Ms. Cotrunio pointed out, that that's the first point that the AAC, the Board of Education, the community members all get to really take a look at those different recommendations, digest it, and start providing comments back. It doesn't then from there just jump right into the superintendent's recommendation. All of that then now has to be digested by staff and then work through with the superintendent. So a lot of that goes into how this calendar and schedule is actually set up as well.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. And then I have another question because in the calendar, I saw there's a gap. Step C is March/April, and then step D is June/July. So what happened to May?
We're working on the feasibility study. It's not listed as behind the scenes staff is working on the
Okay.
feasibility, but we're working on the feasibility study. We're setting up the attendance area committee. We would have by this point already probably had our spring meetings around the county, but if they may have gone into that part of, a little bit later, then maybe we would still be having them.
Okay, because I see that in section D, is from June and July, it says if a AAC is created. Then that means that AAC created in May, so we can move this timeline, section D, from June, July, /July to May, /June? Because based on what I'm hearing, the AAC is created behind the scenes, but then I see section D also has that component. It says
Section,
take
I'm
2
sorry,
months.
D?
D, yeah, I'm sorry,
C,
probably
D,
I
yeah.
didn't pronounce it correctly.
No, I just
D
want to
is
make sure.
dog.
You're going through so quickly. I'm just trying to follow
Sorry
you and make
about
sure.
that. I
Yeah,
will
so
slow
D
down.
is like that's when the AAC starts having their meetings. So just in a generic kind of what months are what, the projection we're working on through February, maybe a little into March, and then March and April and May is when we're doing all of the stuff in the background. So we're working on the feasibility study. We're setting up the software that we do scenario testing with. We're doing all of the beginning of setting up all the reporting. We're setting up all the behind the scenes for doing the AAC, things like that. And then by the time, so that kind of accumulates into March and April and May-ish time, depending on how everything happens. And then in June and July is when we have the feasibility study, and the AAC starts right after that. And then that's also just general feedback for the superintendent in July that leads to July/August being the superintendent's recommendation.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So, let's say, is it possible for us to move this timeline a little bit forward? So instead of presenting the end of August, do you think it's feasible to present sometime in, let's say, July, the end of July? We put it 1 month earlier.
I think that's what we're saying for the superintendent on F. Letter F is July/August, trying to get it out in July if at all possible.
Yeah, but 2019, it was the end of August, August 22nd.
Yeah, the committee encouraged for an earlier timeline if at all possible, but they were also concerned it was balancing between getting it done earlier and giving the board as much time as possible, and also not having it too early that it was just snug in the middle of summer. So it was kind of
I see.
it was a hard to figure out what was maybe the best for
Okay.
that. So, but in that general time frame.
Yeah, so my question is, if I change my amendment to by the end of July, to at least 13 months before implementation, do you think that would work?
That is, as Ms. Bubenko noted, that is where we're shooting for,
Okay.
July to August. Without getting into the individual details of the entire process, I can't comment as far as if it will absolutely happen. That's why
Okay.
it has a little bit of float.
Okay.
But that is where we're shooting for, is that timeframe.
Yeah, because I think the end of August timeline is too tight for the board and for the community. So the intent of this motion is to give the board and community more time.
Understood.
Okay, so we have enough time to evaluate the school redistricting process, yeah.
Understood.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Liu, do you want to see if you have consensus, or do you want to make a motion on your amendment?
So I will ask my colleagues to see whether we have consensus to add the language in the parentheses, but I will change that to, let's say, by the end of July. Or instead of saying by the end of July, say at least 30 months before implementation of the attendance area adjustment. Do you think that would work?
I think it's good.
Mr. Rogers, what are your thoughts on in advance of 13 months, that language?
Mr. Rogers or me?
I mean, I'm sorry, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Lupley?
Well, I'm happy to give Mr. Rogers, who
Yes.
will, as the head or the manager of school
Yeah, let me
planning,
ask-
obviously will have to implement this as we go along.
Thoughts,
with
Mr. Rogers?
support. So, Mr. Rogers, would you like to address the timeline?
Sure. Thank you for that opportunity. Tim Rogers, Manager of School Planning. I think that end of July would be the absolute earliest we could consider presenting a superintendent recommendation. Again, with the feasibility study being presented in June, conducting an AAC and other public engagement in 1 month, basically the month of July, before the superintendent's recommendation would need to be developed, completed mid-July, to be circulated and prepared for presentation to the board by the end of July. That would give us maybe 3 weeks from the typical date of presentation of the feasibility study to when the superintendent's recommendation would need to be complete. I think that's very tight. I think it doesn't offer the community during the summer months a lot of opportunity for in-person or virtual engagement. So I think the timeline as described in the implementation procedures that are before you is sound, and I think we would make it our goal to get the superintendent's recommendation to you as close to July as possible, but we also don't want to limit the public's opportunity to provide feedback to the superintendent following the presentation of the feasibility study.
Dr. Liu, how do you want to proceed?
I saw Ms. Mello raise her hand, so I want to give her a chance to speak.
I don't see her. Is her hand still raised? I don't know why I don't see it. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Mello.
Point of order, isn't this in implementation?
No, this language is not in implementation, but the description I saw is in implementation. That's why I want to add a language in the policy to address the discrepancy, because when I see the 14 months before implementation and also August, when I calculate it, they don't add up. So that's why I want to put language in here. But if we all agree that, well, they will present to us early, I think that's fine. So this is in policy, not in the implementation. The discrepancy appears in implementation.
So now I'm even more confused. Because I think when we're talking about the timeline historically is in implementation, because the policy says that here is the standards by which we will operate, and the implementation is the how we are going to meet those standards. So are you just saying that you're happy if the intent is for implementation to be moved as soon as possible? Or are you saying, because I don't see in here, in your previous email, where you want to add it to the policy
I see. Okay. Yeah. So this email was sent at 1:42 p.m. So that's a additional one. So probably you didn't see it, but I think based on what I'm hearing, I don't want to cause any confusion. So it's okay to leave this amendment. So that is fine, because I think I already made my point clear. We want to have this as early as possible, but I don't want to cause any confusion. And Ms. Mello, I sent an email at 1:42 p.m. That is motion number 5. And also the changes was sent out Tuesday night around 11:29 p.m. But we can discuss later because we don't have enough time. So I'm happy to bring up a motion for this one. Let's continue about discussion about other motions because we have a pretty tight timeline. And thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Banyas?
Can I ask my thing about the 90 to 100%?
Let's wait until, okay. Ms. Delmont-Small?
I was going to speak to Dr. Liu's motion on moving this up to, on her motion number 5, as far as the superintendent providing the attendance area adjustment plan by the end of June. Because having gone through this process 2 times, I will tell you, the challenge always is the Board of Education having enough time to hear from the community and to make the decisions that we have to make. Because last 2 times, everything was crazily rushed. And this is one of those things that statutorily, the Board of Education, we have to do. And it is probably one of the most important things we do for the community and the school system is the redistricting process, because it does impact all of our students. So we have to somehow, and I know this is an impossible ask, but we got to figure this out. We need to build in more time so that the board has the opportunity to hear from the community, and the board has the opportunity to get a plan that is the least worst of all possible plans. Because keep in mind, the other piece that we have that we now have to factor into this is the, where did I put it? Is the House Bill 1142 from Senator Lamb, where it is introducing the additional testimony when we, like if we don't move we all know, if we don't move a polygon and then, oops, we're going to move a polygon, now we have to have a public meeting for it. So not only do we have to build in additional time for the board as a body to discuss and figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, to hear from the community, we also have to factor in that piece from the legislation. So somehow we have to increase the time for the board. And the challenge we have is that it's hard to get us all in the same room, unfortunately, but it's just the way that it is. So if we're able to build in this additional time by moving things up, or maybe we even have to reimagine how we utilize the AAC in order to get to a point where we could have more input. Because from my vague memory from the last 2 times, the AAC process and then the superintendent's proposal that he provided to the board, I know in one of those redistricting, we just, no offense, Dr. M, we just kind of put it to the side and we just started from scratch. So I want to be able to make sure that we have the ability to give the board that flexibility and to work with the community. Because as you know, board members do their own scenarios. I mean, this is we recognize how labor intensive we make it for you. And we appreciate you and the consultants being able to help us. But again, we need that flexibility in time to be able to do this to the best of our ability.
And we definitely hear the comments from all the board members, and we will, again, go back and look at the granular details to see where we might be able to work on the whole entire process to see if we can add that time. One thing we want to be very careful about is, you're very right, is from a certain point, the board has that community input. One thing that we definitely heard from the community, from the previous redistricting, as well as the committee, is that community input really needs to be early on as well. So that's one of the factors that we'll take a look at to see how we can meld that all together and see how we can increase or take into consideration the time that you're speaking of.
Well, and off the top of my head, I'm just wondering if a change to the process of having, you guys are working on the feasibility study, right? And I know that that's the first time that we get to see it. And the superintendent provide a plan earlier. So we do feasibility study, superintendent plan, AAC, and board. So we have the AAC comment on the superintendent's plan after he officially, you know what I'm saying? He comes up with the plan, the AAC then comments on that as opposed, do we do that? It is so late.
Okay, the AAC advises the superintendent, so that's why the
Right.
AAC is done before his plan.
Right, so what I'm saying is what if we do it afterwards? I know everybody's head is probably exploding.
That's okay, well, the AAC is currently used in to advise him, so, or her, whoever.
But
would
we
be in that
could use
position,
the AAC to advise to advise the board. And that's kind of what I'm looking at this, because the ultimate plan is the board's plan, correct? Just like the budget, the ultimate budget is the board's plan. So with the budget, the superintendent drops his budget, and then the community makes comments on the budget, and the board makes comments, and that train leaves the station. What if we were to do the same with redistricting? So what we would do is feasibility study, superintendent's plan, AAC, the board and the rest of the community, and just move it that way.
If I may make a suggestion.
Go right ahead. And
just because I know we are at 8:43 here.
Yes.
And there's a timeline. As Ms. Mallow pointed out, this really falls into the implementation procedures of how it's done. We definitely hear you. We have had similar conversations internally with staff. I say we take this portion offline to continue the conversation.
I appreciate that, because I think we can figure this thing out.
Yes, ma'am.
So to go back to another one of Dr. Yoon's amendments, the 90 to 110%.
If I could
Mr.
recommend,
Banyas?
Ms. Katrunio,
Yes.
if the board doesn't mind, if we could follow it, and
Sure.
I think it would help it if, especially with time, if we could follow just in sequence.
Okay, I thought that one was the next one. Okay.
Well, as we started from the back, if we can go forward, I know another item that Dr. Liu pointed out was the definition of diversity. And I'm glad that our outside counsel is on with us here. This is something that we have discussed as staff as well as with internal counsel and outside counsel. Ultimately, what this came down to for us is how diversity is utilized within this policy. The recommendations for the modification of the definition was not intended to change the guidance of the school system, as is pointed out in policy 1080 and 7000. It was more to direct this specific definition to this policy. To be more specific, our concern was with all the different items that were listed within that definition, those could very easily be construed, and as you tie it back to the consideration factors, each of those factors can be construed as something that needs to be looked at, and not all of them are measurable, and not all of them are ones that we can look at as we're doing it. So, and please feel free to jump in, Ms. Bresler, but it was felt that that could lead us into an issue where we might have set us up for appeals. So we specifically looked at this to pare it down to what could be measured and what would affect specifically this policy.
So I want to tell you why I think I like the policy 1080 definition, because it's really inclusive. And now I hear your concern because some of the measures may not be measurable. If that's the case, do you think it would work if we change, let's say, page 3 of 12, section 3.8, diversity of the student population, let's say, measurable, diversity of the student population, if they're measurable, or, well, someone help me draft the language, but you see my point, basically. I like the diversity definition in the original version, because many people may look at this policy 60-10. Especially next year, we're going to have a redistricting process because of High School 13. And my concern is, if the community members, parents, and students, they look at this definition, they will think that, well, we define diversity differently. We don't recognize, accept, or respect the individuals from different
Dr.
life
Liu, I just want to warn you,
experiences. Yeah.
you're out of time, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'd
That's
let you go
okay.
a little past because it was a number of things, but, okay.
I believe I understand what you're saying, Dr. Liu, is to have the definition as the full definition to describe diversity, but in page 3 of 12, as you noted, section 3A, potentially add the language in there to identify the factor is the measurable items within diversity. That's, I guess, a question I would like to ask to Ms. Bresler to get her legal opinion of how that might set confusion or potentially appeals.
Yeah, I think it would be confusing and set up the board for potential appeals. The purpose of the definitions is to define the term as you're going to be using it in the policy. So you're going to be defining a term in ways that aren't measurable, in some respects in ways that are illegal, with the expectation that the definition of that term and its in all of the expanded categories is what is meant by diversity of student population. If you're not going to use them in the policy, then they shouldn't be in the definition. I think it'll cause a lot of confusion. You're certainly not going to be looking at how many people of a certain religious belief are in one school compared to another. You don't have any data on sexual orientation. I don't want anybody thinking that you can poll it and find out about gender identity. And I just think it's, the policy you have on diversity talks about recognizing and accepting individuals with differences. And that is, you can name all those categories and have the policy look at respecting individuals, regardless, a whole diverse group, and all the ways that human beings are different from each other. But here you're looking at measuring a student population. You're going to look at, if you make a certain kinds of boundary changes, what is the population of that new student population? What does it look like? And I just think there's no way to do that effectively unless you can measure it, and those categories ought to be 1, measurable, and 2, legal.
Ms. Mosley?
My comment is related to this one. I think that across all of our policies, since our school system uses all of our policies integrated into each other, that the definitions should be explicit and should be common across all of them. And that if diversity isn't the right word for this definition, then it needs a different word that is actually what we're trying to say. Because I think it is defined in 1080 and is defined as 7,000 as its initial 1 in 6010. But if that is changed and it has to be something different for this particular policy, then it should be a different word with a different definition, not the same word defined different ways for policies that are used across the same body.
Dr. Wu?
I think what I heard from Ms. Bresler is that we can measure the race, ethnicity, or the diversity. I think we definitely can measure gender identity, socioeconomic, right? And everything there. If you want to measure that, we can measure others. So it's quantitative stuff you can measure. I really echo with Dr. Liu and Ms. Mosley. We should be consistent to define something we're promoting, and we need to be consistent.
Go ahead.
Janae Varlak, Policy Manager. The definition in this policy has a caveat that says, in the context of this policy, this is what we're referring to. And we do that in many other policies. We do have standard definitions across policies, but not all policies can you use the standard definition word for word. And you have to tailor those definitions accordingly. So we generally use the context of, in the context of this policy, diversity is referred to as whatever. I understand about using different words, and we do that at times when we can easily do so. In this case, what would we say? How would we refer to the two factors that we're using? It doesn't change the reference to 1080 and all that 1080 embodies. We don't change any of that.
But you're using two policies together that have different definitions for the same word. So I think that instead of using diversity, it should be just saying not limited to race, ethnicity, social, economic status, language. That should be what is used instead of the word diversity in this policy. It shouldn't be a definition, it should just be a phrase that's written out in the policy where diversity is. If there isn't a word that is suggested. Because 1080 is, hand in hand with this policy because it's hand in hand with all of our policies. And if diversity is defined as explicitly that whole block of information, then we're not talking about what diversity is defined as. We're talking about this particular definition, which is race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and language.
May I ask, would that intent follow what you were looking for, Dr. Liu? Is if diversity was not defined within 6010, so diversity was still defined in 1080, and as Ms. Mosley's pointing out, 3A would not say diversity, but would be specific to those measurable factors.
Then I have a question because you can see 3.B is social economic compensation. And then .D is distribution of English language learners. And then in the new definition, I see it says race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and language. So now I'm really confused because before I saw diversity is a really broad definition. Now if we single out those three, and I saw two of them actually already defined in the later section. So actually to me, I feel more confused.
Understood. And I guess this comes back to, again, the discussions that we had with the actual measurable factors. It does have the two items here, and one of the recommendations through our discussions was to actually remove 3A and basically have it as 3B, C, D, E, and F. While race and ethnicity is a legal item that we can measure and utilize, we can do it legally as long as it is in a group and not individual down to the individual student. It typically is not one that we actually do make the decisions based off of, but we legally could. So to your point, if the socioeconomic and the English language learners are already in here, that also would go towards what Ms. Mosley is saying and removing the definition as it currently is in policy 6010.
Are you saying remove letter A?
We could. The initial recommendation was to remove the definition and just spell it out in A. But as Dr. Liu is pointing out, a couple of those items are already in here, as in B and D. Therefore, we wouldn't necessarily need to put it in A. A could just be removed since it would now reference diversity, which would no longer be there.
Ms. Mosley, what do you think about that?
Part of the definition for diversity you have is race and ethnicity. Would that be added instead of A? Would it be changed so that all of them are identified A, B, and C? Or A, B, and D? Or are you saying that race and ethnicity are not going to be in that policy at all?
Yeah, letter 3A used to be race and ethnicity. And it is for the current policy.
It just says diversity. 3A.
In the current policy that is the current board approved, that's on our website, 3A is race and ethnicity, not the draft you're looking at, but the actual.
Oh, okay. I was looking at the wrong part. Okay.
So to answer your question, yes, A could go back to basically what it is now to identify race and ethnicity.
You also have F still, don't you?
I'm sorry, say that again?
F, subparagraph F, that's still in there?
Other reliable demographic diversity factors?
Right, doesn't that give you the flexibility?
Yes, ma'am, it would.
Yeah, the current policy reads 3A, the racial/ethnic composition of the school, of the student population, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, if we're gonna delete the definition, then I think all aspects of the definition need to continue to be in the policy, because that's the intent. So if it's deleting A and thinking that it's part of F, or if it's being explicit and going back to what 3A used to be, then I think that's the same thing.
I think the clearest thing is, as it's currently in the current policy and it's in the definition, that we would have the race and ethnicity as 3A.
Okay.
Ms. Mallow?
Sorry, just realized I was muted.
Oh, I think you were.
So for clarity's sake, the recommendation at this point is to take out the word diversity, to revert 3A to its current racial composition, and to eliminate the definition of diversity. What would we have in F? And is it okay to have diversity indicators if not diversity being defined? But I did want to follow up. So the real reason I raised my hand once is that I want Dr. Wu to understand that we cannot use things like gender identity and sexuality because we don't have that information. We do not know how many students in our community are LGBTQ. And it would be illegal at best. So, but can someone confirm that that what I identified is what is being proposed? Because I'm not clear.
I believe you are correct in what you identified, yes. And I think the other part of your question is within F, the demographic and diversity indicators. If it's not defined in policy 6010, I think that's where it would revert back to the reference policies. And that would be, F would be the factor that would basically be the generalized factor. So if there are demographic or other factors that do come about that can be used, it allows us to do those.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Watts?
For 3A, is it racial and ethnicity? Because Ms. Mallow just said racial, and I want to make sure it's both.
Sure, the current reading is the racial/ethnic composition of the student population.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Delmonte? Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, so do we need to go by consensus on that, or changing that language? It seems we're all in agreement.
I believe we understand what you're
saying.
It's been
Okay.
repeated a couple times.
Okay, so working back.
Okay, so the next one would be the recommendation specifically towards the AAC. And basically the two items, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Liu, but the two items that are covered within this motion are, one, that the AAC is both appointed by both the superintendent and the Board of Education, and provides feedback to both the superintendent and the Board of Education.
Yes, that's the first component.
Right. So with that first point, or for that first component, sorry, it's been a long day. The item I want to point out here, and the reason part of the reason in our discussions that we went through and did this is the AAC has always been a committee that provides the recommendations and feedback to the superintendent. And I understand the use of the committee to also provide feedback to the Board of Education as well. Our consideration factor is we all know that the boundary adjustment process is a very polarized process. And we do have, unfortunately, historical history and factors that show us that, unfortunately, not everybody acts civilly. And our concern for consideration with this is as soon as, and I would ask Ms. Bresler to confirm my understanding on this, as soon as the Board of Education goes to appoint committee members, it now becomes a committee that is deemed by an elected board, which would require it to be compliant with the Open Meetings Act. And that's where our concern comes in, is we have concern with, based off of historic actions that have taken place, including death threats and so on and so forth, we have concerns with actually getting volunteers. And then as the Open Meeting Act, our other concern is not whoever does volunteer might not actually feel comfortable speaking and saying really what's on their mind. So it's not saying that we can't have it compared to the Open Meetings Act, but those are considerations that we have taken into, that then ties into the second item that you have in here, Dr. Liu, is the AAC members need to be representative. And I emphasize the word need in there because that puts a definitive factor on the representation of the AAC. And while we can do outreach to get to try and get it, we cannot force anybody to be on this committee. And if it is in there that we need or have to, but we can't, that now gets us into the legal ramifications of an appealable item saying that we did not comply with a portion of the policy.
Do you have a suggested wording for that one? If we can replace the word needs, could you suggest something? Because I want the AAC member to be representative of the county diverse population and the geographical area, but I understand what you're saying. Can you help me find appropriate wording for that?
We actually have we added into the makeup of the AAC and the implementation procedures. The AAC shall consist of 10 to 15 members. Consideration will be given to providing diverse representation. And then it says representation may include but is not limited to. And in that section, we do talk about planning regions, so referring to a variety of geographies from the membership.
Yeah, but the definition of planning region has been removed, so I don't have a clear understanding of the planning definition.
Dr. Liu, I'm sorry, you're out of time.
Planning regions got moved to the implementation procedures. It was deleted because it wasn't used in the policy, so it just got moved to IP.
Ms. Delma-Small, did you have a question or is your hand still raised?
Yes. So the challenge we have is that the last time we had the AAC, it wasn't a board committee, and that's when all the problems happened. So whether it's open meetings, whether the board appoints or not, that's not getting rid of the you understand what I'm saying? That's not getting rid of the problem, because we had the problem when the committee wasn't a board committee of people being threatened, right?
Correct. Yes, the last time it was not a board committee and that still happened. So not having it comply with the Open Meetings Act does not mean that it won't happen. It's just adding another factor on that gives it a likelihood that it would.
Right, but I think where Dr. Liu is going also by her definition or of having diverse. Also, we kind of broke up for board members into the 5 councilmanic districts. So I think that's also an issue of diversity, diverse as well, is coming from all of the districts, which we don't do because we do the planning regions. You know what I'm saying? We almost have to migrate from planning to, I would say, councilmanic.
Ms. Mallow?
I do think that the majority of the problems with the AAC members being threatened happened 2 iterations ago when the meetings were live streamed, and it was very much public front and center. And regardless of under whose auspices the committee was, the very public nature of it was directly relatable to the harassment that people had lobbied against them. So I do think that out of a protection of the community, that needs to be something that we really give credence to.
Any further discussion? Ms. Thomas-Bell?
Yeah, I mean, we don't want that to happen to the community members. So to me, that's the most important thing, right? So the challenge we have is what we're doing now is just creates that environment, for lack of a better term. So the question is, how do we do it? And as I had said before, what if we switched the order? I guess I would like my colleagues to think, if the order was feasibility study, superintendent's plan, AAC, and board, do we think that might mitigate some of that? Because the community is used to providing input once the board gets it. So there's no reason why the AAC can't be another voice in that process. I'm just asking my colleagues to think about that, and for you as well.
And I appreciate that perspective. I could be naive, but I don't necessarily think the timing or what they're reviewing is going to have a factor on that. I think with them reviewing the superintendents or providing recommendations towards that or providing feedback to the Board of Education, it's still going to have that interaction with the community. So I don't know if swapping the timing of those is going to have it might have some, but I don't know if it's going to have a large impact with regards to this topic.
So it's basically going to be a nightmare either way, is what you're saying.
It's possible, but I think what Ms. Mallow was saying is 2 times ago in 2017, when it was live streamed, which again, that's
Right.
comparable to the Open Meetings Act, that's when the majority of the death threats and everything were happening. And then in 2019, when it wasn't live streamed because it was something that was implemented by the superintendent, not saying it wasn't there, but it was mitigated a little bit.
It was a lot different.
Right,
thank
so I think it ultimately comes down to, with this motion, the 3 factors. 1, the board also approving or appointing, which would then get you into our discussion we're having now. The AAC having feedback to the board, which I could see could be very reasonable. And then again, that word need, because that gets us into that appealable factor.
I want to make
Ms.
a comment.
Oh.
Ms. Mosley.
Ms. Mosley?
It was my understanding that the intent of the AAC was to give that community feedback time period before the superintendent gave his recommendation, so that there was that avenue for a community body to give that part of the aspect instead of after, right? So the AAC isn't really for the Board of Ed. We have the public, and we have all of our public testimony, and we have all of the input sessions. The AAC's intent is so that the superintendent can get prepared for creating the recommendation. So it doesn't make much sense to me to move that out of the superintendent's ballpark to put it into ours, to add more community voice into ours, because we have open community voice already happening for our side of the equation. And it would really be beneficial for the community and for us that the AAC helps the superintendent with his recommendation. It kind of gives them a pre-voice to the whole situation. So I don't think the intention at all is to have it under the Board of Ed.
Dr. Wu?
I think if I recall 2017's AAC, one big issue is they are trying to create a new map, right, live. That's really, the process caused kind of very contentious reaction. It's not because they're public, they're meeting the public. I think the Lex AAC, they're meeting our public too, we're public too, right? I attended a few of that. I think it's really, I really want to keep the AAC meeting to be public, people can listen to, but at the same time, we over-task them. Like in 2017, we tasked them with creating an alternative solution. That's the reason people sitting there see their polygon moved, right? And that created like high attention, which they couldn't bear, right? So I just think over-task them. So for the other one, I think it's the problem. I think the board really want to weigh in because ACC has a strong influence on the final proposal from the superintendent. We want to make sure the AAC appointed by the superintendent can be reflective of a diverse population and the geographic area, right? If you only select people from one area or people you believe and have, I think it's not for this superintendent or for future superintendent, right? It's really want to make sure the process can be fair from the starting point.
Absolutely, and I think, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, we fully intend to have the meetings continue to be open to the public. We fully intend to continue to do the notes from the meetings and describe everything that happened in the meetings for the public to see afterwards, and we post them online very quickly after the meetings. So we still want those meetings and the proceedings to be transparent. And you are correct, we definitely changed the scope of the role of the committee both between those 2 years, and that definitely softened the impact on their personal lives, I think, that year. So that was definitely impactful. But I just want to say again, we did put into the IP that the members are to be given, it's to be given, consideration will be given to providing a diverse representation, and then under that we do include the geographical component as well in his implementation procedures.
So your point, we don't need to put it in the policy, but you were putting the implementation.
Well, and that was going to be a question I was going to ask towards the board. We hear the community's feedback and the board's feedback, and as this is within the implementation procedure, we will make every effort we can to have a diverse makeup of the AAC. So again, I don't feel it needs to be in the policy, but that's an item that the board can decide.
Okay, in the interest of time.
I just have another question.
Okay.
Or the other point, I would say, or do we really need an ACC for the superintendent, or?
I think so. We do go from the very beginning, as the committee was trying to say, to try and get that community input from the very beginning, and we will continue to do that, and we will reach out in as many ways as we can. I think the AAC serves a purpose to kind of focus instead of having just the global voice. The AAC, especially if it's a diverse AAC from the multiple different regions, it does start to focus that down, very similar to the way the Board of Education acts. You guys are representations of the community, but you focus that down into a body, and that's the same way that the AAC can act.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So moving, next one.
Yes, ma'am. So the next, that was number 2 or 3. So number 2 is a motion regarding let's see, it says the return it's for B1A, the efficient use of available space by maintaining the buildings.
I think she had one on program.
Locational
Oh,
program.
yes, sorry, I skipped over. So this motion was actually on page 2 of 12. It's B.1E, and it's reducing this down to just note the location of regional programs. We took no concerns over that, so.
And it also provides consistency with the other ones that we simplified, so.
Correct. This was basically removing that factor that we did on some of the other things as well.
Okay, then the last but not least.
So then we go to number 1, which is the discussion with regards to the 90 to 100 or 90 to 110. And again, as we noted before, There is, and I believe, Dr. Liu, you did try to take this into consideration, the confusion that has happened in the past with regards to having the multiple different numbers there. I want to say that through a lot of our discussions, we agree with you. If we had the capacity, if we had the ability, we would love to have all of our facilities no greater than 100%. We are obviously where we are currently. The other factor that we take into consideration with this is when you have it at 100%, it doesn't give it a lot of room for the ebb and flow of enrollment from really day to day or week to week, but from year to year. So having that 110% starts to allow for that. The other item, because this is a point that was discussed during the committee, is at having that factor at 100, that starts to at least build into the consideration that any school that is over that target utilization 100 now has to be considered by the Board of Education, or whether or not you want to enter into the process. This also, I know you were trying with the motion to add in there still that range, but this ties back into the other piece of legislation that is, I want to make sure I don't get it wrong, 4-140, that specifically ties to the term target utilization. Anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I think that if we're using the term target utilization in order to align with the law, we either need to use it as the prompt, the term for the prompt, or I think if we exclude it completely, but I think if we switch it from the prompt to that goal, it might confuse the intent of the law a little bit, because then the law would be based on the goal, not the prompting of the boundary review. I know that's very wordy and strange, but I think the best options are to either leave target utilization associated with prompt or to remove it completely and just use ranges within the text.
Ms. Watts?
Two things. I want to make sure that I'm clear on page 8. That was something that the motion is not going forward. That we've figured out we can
Correct.
Increase the diversity through. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure because that wasn't clear. And then also jumping back to page 2 of 12, I had my hand up for that. I want to make sure that the staff is comfortable with removing with the goal of achieving an equitable distribution of regional programs across the country, county.
Yes.
I am not okay with that. Can you explain why you're okay with that?
It's not that we don't want an equitable distribution of programs across the county. It's that during the boundary line review, the consideration being where there are programs and how much they're used. And then any decisions about placing programs would be done as needed, whether as a discussion through this process or outside of this process.
And this was also tied into previous conversations that we had specifically with 3B. The original text that we had in the initial draft was socioeconomic composition of each school's student population using applicable socioeconomic data with the goal of balancing measurable. And that discussion that we had was removing that goal. So removing the goal out of B1E is similar to that other. So it's consistent with other modifications that we have done with this policy draft.
Which one did you just refer to? 3 what?
3B.
What page is that on?
Yeah, we specifically discussed
6.
3B, but it also goes to 3C as measures and 3D.
What page?
Page 6.
That's page 3 of 12.
So you think that's enough to capture the intent of what was here? Because I just don't read it that way.
Yes. We place programs where we have the space and where they're needed to the best of our abilities. So I think that not having that specifier is okay in this instance. I'm not sure if, in terms of tying the two together.
Okay, I don't agree with this, so I'd like to vote on it.
I don't know if Mr. Rogers wanted to say anything on this one or not. I remember we had a conversation about it, but I'm not remembering all the details, sorry.
I think it would just be the same concepts that you've already discussed, maybe in different words. I think it's important to consider where regional programs are located in terms of the capacity of schools as we're going through the boundary review process, and that's why it's listed as a consideration. But specifying that the boundary review process should achieve an equitable distribution of regional programs kind of includes something that's outside the purview of school boundaries. Programs are placed, as Ms. Bubenko described, kind of in conjunction with representatives from the early childhood and special ed programs. We work with them to place programs where there's space and where they're needed. So I think
say one of the reasons I'm harping on this is because we do have Kerwin coming on board, and so we're going to have an expansion of these programs serving the 3 and 4 year olds, and we're having a lot of conversations about where are we going to place these programs, where we're going to look for space for the programs, and so I want to make sure that we're thinking longer term than what we currently just do, because we have a big piece of legislation coming online that's going to add a lot that may come into play here.
And I can assure you, Ms. Watts, that we have actually a standing meeting every Wednesday morning to specifically talk. It's one of the subgroups of the Kerwin with Dr. Walker. So we are thinking long-term with regards to current, how it's going to affect our space needs, and how we can start to plan for that now for next year and throughout the next 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Mosley?
My comments were similar on this same line item, number B1E. I'm concerned about concentrating programs. So I thought that having the goal of equitable distribution across programs was very explicit in maintaining that that wouldn't be happening, or that so I would like to see it stay in there.
Okay, Mr. Banyas.
I have a question about the 90 to 100 thing. So when we install portables or relocatables, in your experience, what % capacity is that usually at?
An individual portable?
Yes.
The school capacity in individual portable is going to be based off of the total project. As far as occupancy, the portable is approximately 40 students.
Are you talking about what the capacity utilization of the school is when we would install a portable there? Is that
Yeah,
what
so
you're,
like
okay.
if we have a school and the population changes and suddenly that's over capacity, we have like 110%.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
At what level of that % do we usually start adding portables?
Sure. Mr. Rogers, do you want to?
Yeah, I would say it varies by school, and there are many factors, including the long-term projection for the school. So we look at each school on a case-by-case basis. We typically solicit input from the school leadership in terms of how they're using their building, what they're seeing in their building in terms of crowding and classroom needs. And then we take that into account with the long-term and short-term projections, the availability of funding for portables. And we assess all of that. So I would say in terms of a percentage, there's really no set trigger, but typically we start considering portable placement and start hearing from the schools in terms of requests, anywhere between 95% and 105%, depending on the school.
Okay, so it's not usually after 110 and further, it's usually before that mark.
I would say it is. And there are many schools that function adequately and have been for years, and we don't get requests from them at 105%.
Okay, thank you.
This is going to be the last question for Dr. Wu, and then I think we need to start to
Sure.
take action.
I think I want to make a comment on that portable stuff first. A lot of schools, you were not able to put a portable there at all because the location, geological area, right? You couldn't add a portable to that building at all, right? So I think my question, in the past, I think we need to put a wider range, 91 or 10. But I would think about an analogy or target utilization. The analogy, you have a car, like you can only put 5 people, your target is 5 people. You are not put a 6 at the target, right? Or I think personally, I think we used like 110 or even higher, which try to align to put APFO and other stuff. I think I want to change that to be 100%. That's our goal. If anything about that is overcrowded, right? I think that direction will send a message to our capital budget, right? We need to build a new school, build a new capacity there. Otherwise, we'll keep catching this up, and we're never catching up because we set a goal is 110%. So I think at the same time, I have a concern as well because our overall capacity is more than 100% already, right? I don't think goal for this is to try to trigger redistricting every year. It's really try to put a reasonable goal, like 100% of the reasonable goal, and then we evaluate our capital needs based on this goal. That's I was supported to put 100% as the range there, the upper range there. That's my comment.
And I will just add on to that, I think it's the only way that people know what we need, because these numbers get used in different ways by different entities, depending on the situation. And I think that when you say 110%, oh, they're fine. They don't need more capital funding. They don't need projects, because then they use that 110% number, when we really should be, the goal should be 100%, be it as it maybe isn't possible for some of our schools. So I think we really need to take action on this policy and maybe go.
Chair Cortino, I have a suggestion.
Go.
So I think Dr. Lu's email fair structure. Do you want to go through her order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Mr. Lubley.
Right.
Yeah, I believe where we are now is working backwards. We have discussed all of them up to item number 3 and come to the conclusions that through the language we have an understanding. I believe Ms. Watts noted that she would like to vote separately on number 2, specifically regarding the language of the regional programs. And it sounds like the board is probably going to want to vote on item number 1 as well regarding the percentage range.
It did seem like there was a consensus though on the removing the definition of diversity and adding back in the racial/ethnic composition.
That's a big list. Let me ask if there's consensus on that one.
Okay.
From my colleagues.
Well, I have a question because for section F, B.1.F, it has a wording. I'm sorry, I read it wrong. So it has the wording about diversity. It does have that in there. Let me see, where is it? Sorry.
It's on page 3 of 12, number 3F, other reliable demographic and diversity factors.
Yes, you're correct. So it does have the diversity because it says where feasible. Can we just feasible and then keep the original definition of diversity? But either way works for me because I just want to make sure that we capture the spirit of diversity.
I believe we could. This was, I believe, a comment that we did receive from outside counsel, so I'd like to give Ms. Bresler the opportunity to respond to that if she would like.
I think what you're going to do is open the door to people finding statistics someplace in the Googling statistics on what might be feasible to measure, and then we're going to be in a debate about how reliable it is. I just think it opens the door to so many unknowns that I really would not recommend it.
Okay, then I'm okay with it. Thank you.
Ms. Mallow, quickly.
I was hoping Ms. Bresler could weigh in on the 90 to 100% goal, whether that is recommended or not recommended.
You know, that's not really a legal question. It's sort of an operational question. I will say that the legislation for 140 talks about you can set your program capacity, the board can set target utilization, but then it talks about in terms of reporting that the Board of Education would submit an annual report. And one of the considerations was if a permanent school facility was not within 10% of target utilization. So if your target is at 110, then within 10% of that is not within 10% of that, winds up, it just affects the definition. And then it talks about at 20% within 20% of target utilization, then you've got to kind of explain why you're not doing something about it. So it just impacts, there's a domino effect is my point.
Ms. Thomas-Small, quickly.
Regarding 4140, the target utilization, all it is saying, I believe we have to be 90 to 100 because what it's saying is if we're not within 10% or not within 20%, we just have to provide something in writing. And every time we can provide something in writing that shows that we are not within what we want as a community, which is 90 to 100%, I think that's a good thing. I don't think it's going to impact this in any way, other than allowing us to have continuous voice that we need more capacity.
I believe what Ms. Bresler is saying is that it still applies, it just adjusts the factor down.
Right, but we need the community expects, and we as a system would like to have 90 between 100. None of us want to have 110% in our schools. We would like it to be 100 because then that would allow for what you asked for, which was for enrollment movement up and down. But if we're at 110 and all our movement is up, we're in a crisis situation, and we want to avoid that.
Okay, so we should, Mr. Lubley, would you suggest going number one, we don't need action? I mean, I'm going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I would suggest there's the two items here. It's motion number 1 and motion number 2. I think with motion number 1, we would just like to be very clear, since there is a lot of discussion and the 90 to 110, 90 to 100 is several different locations. So we would like to have a very clear motion as far as what the target is, what the prompt is, so that we can make sure that the policy is written out.
Dr. Liu?
Yeah, so the target is from 90 to 100%.
Well, just make the motion, make your motion.
I'm sorry, can we just clarify? I know it sounds funny because we use the word target utilization, but target utilization refers to the prompt as it's written now. And the goal is, that's how the definition is currently used in the policy. Target utilization is what prompts consideration of the boundary review. I know it's oddly written, I'm sorry.
Can we have our own definition, or it needs to be the same as the one other places use? Because what I'm hearing is when the target utilization is outside 10% of target utilization, we need to send a report. If outside 20%, and then we reduce it. But when I look at 110, if you have additional 10%, that's 121%. If you add another 20%, that is more than 130%. So that is really overcrowded. So to me, I think the goal, or whatever wording we'll use, so first, are we okay to have our own definition? Because this is not inconsistent across different policy within our system. So it's just the wording we use. But here, if we specify the target utilization is our goal, because I said it's a desired outcome. And in the
Dr. Liu, can you be succinct? We really need to.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
I guess the question is, what range do you want for the prompt?
Okay.
And what range do you
greater
want
to
for
110.
the result of a boundary scenario?
Got it. Yeah. So please refer to motion 1. I read it. So for the target utilization is desired outcome between 90 and 100%. And then school attendance area projections are well above the target utilization. Example, projection greater 110% and available capacity exists. That is when we have the potential school redistricting.
Okay.
Yeah, so that threshold is greater than 110. You can see I didn't say outside of 90 to 110 because I think for below 90, it doesn't trigger school redistricting, only
Okay.
above 110.
So the proposal is when the attendance area goes above 110, is a prompt for consideration of a boundary review, and the goal of any scenario should be 90 to 100%.
Yes, that's the intent, but I will listen to my colleagues.
Yes.
So you want to make a motion?
So make the motion.
That's the time.
Yeah, so I already sent the motion to,
Just read
I'm going to
read
read it, okay?
Yeah, read it.
I move the board to amend, parentheses, page 11 or 12, definition U to read target utilization, enrollment between 90% and 100%, utilization of the program capacity of a permanent school facility as a desired outcome. And to amend page 2 of 12, A.3 to read, school attendance area projections are well above the target utilization, parentheses, example, projections greater than 110%, parentheses, and available capacity exists.
I second.
Okay. I have a motion by Dr. Wu and a second by Dr. Wu.
I have my hand up.
Ms. Mosley?
I think we need outside of the bounds scope because I think that a trigger for redistricting, if we have capacity at a school that is below 90%, then that's important to also trigger redistricting, especially if it gets way below. Just as important as above, because we can't run the same programs, we can't staff it optimally, and other things like that. So below the target range is also important.
I will note that that is how factor A3 is currently written. I understand where we currently are. Our current factor that we look at is that capacity need of what we have. But I do understand what Ms. Mosley is saying is there are two ends of a range.
Ms. Mallow?
One of the concerns I have about changing a definition to be talking about desired outcomes, target utilization in and of itself, the definition is not about a desired outcome. The definition is a definition. So if you're saying that you just want to change it 90 to 110 or 100% utilization of the program capacity, that's one thing, but that's not what this motion is doing. And as such, I can't support this motion, as well as for the considerations that Ms. Mosley just presented, that it is putting outside the bounds the fact that we could need to, if a school hits 70% capacity, then we need to address that. And this would take that away if we approved it as presented. And I don't think we should limit or constrain ourselves in that way.
So do you want to make an amendment?
Ms. Cotrino?
Mr. Wu raised his hand. He wants to make a comment.
If I may, this might help with us here. I think having the definition of target utilization is a third place within the policy that has the range in it, and it's not necessarily needed. I think the two items that we're specifically talking about here are both on page 2 of 12. So at the very top, number 3, that's the prompt. So I think that in itself is focused on two items that one, Ms. Mosley noted, is as it's currently written outside, so it does take into account both ends of the range. But this is where I believe Dr. Liu, that you're noting that it should be the 90 to 110 as the prompt. And then the second item is down under B1, where it says school attendance area utilization should stay within the capacity utilization range, and it currently says 90 to 110, I believe that's where you want the 90 to 100.
Okay, so just want to make sure, so basically, 8.3 is the prompt. That is when we trigger redistricting. We want to say that is 90 to 110%. And then for B.1, we change the 90 to 110% to 90 to 100. So it captures both the intent, right?
Correct.
Okay, then
A
that will
are
work.
the factors, A are the factors that the board consider to decide if you want to go into the process. After the board decides, yes, we want to get into the process, that's where the B factors come in. And as we're going through the process, it sounds like the number that you're looking to hit for each school is 100% as much as possible, obviously if capacity allows. So that's where the 90 to 110 or 100 would be under B, but the prompt, the trigger would be under A, which is 3 or A3. And this is a very important lesson to everybody. As you can see, this is very confusing for us to discuss, let alone the community, so.
Could you just restate slowly
Certainly.
your interpretation of
Yes,
the
ma'am.
trigger?
Correct.
And then,
So the first item is that the range appears in 3 places within the policy, which is adding to the confusion. I guess the last place it shows up is in the definition, and the definition is not really needed. So one recommendation would be to remove the definition of target utilization, which limits this down to 2 locations for this range, both of which are on page 2 of 12. 2 of 12 is part of Standards Section 3. Standards Section 3 has 2 primary areas. A, which is the factors that the board consider to decide if they're going to enter into the redistricting process. That is the prompt. So from what I'm understanding, the prompt would be that 90 to 110. So for 3A, we would have it at 90 to 110. Now, the point the board has to discuss is Dr. Liu is saying it should be only 110. Ms. Mallow and Ms. Mosley are saying it should be both ranges, which is how it is written now, is outside of that range. The second item is then B. Those are the factors that the board considers as we're within the actual redistricting process. And from what I'm understanding, the goal is to state that we don't want any building or any school to be over 100% capacity. So as we're going through the process, our goal would be to try and make boundary adjustments to get the schools to 100%. So the two locations for the range would be A3 of 90 to 110 and B1 of 90 to 100%.
so I don't understand about so do we just eliminate the term target utilization throughout the whole document? I don't understand what you mean by
I think
removing it.
it's adding another layer of confusion.
If we just have the percentages in line when you're reading it, then that should be sufficient.
Well, actually,
for-
that's going to mess everything up because going back to 4140, they have the term target utilization. So if we don't define target utilization, there is no definition for 4140.
I believe that it says target utilization or whatever we're.
Target utilization means the target
Ms.
utilization set by the
Thomas
Howard
Small?
County School System.
I just need to clarify, because we are.
Okay.
So I think so Ms. Cortonio, can I just see, I think the major concern is that capacity utilization, right? Anything else is kind of, we can either agree with it, but it's really, where do we do the language change, right? So.
I believe I got a recommendation from Dr. Varlek, is I believe we understand what you're looking for with regards to the prompt 90 to 110, the goal of 90 to 100, that if the board votes and approves the policy with amendments, we can finalize the language with that understanding from the Board of Education.
Okay, that works.
So then we would have the target,
Yes, ma'am. We'll make sure that we review the law specifically, and we make sure that we will comply with, if it specifically says target utilization, we'll keep that in there so that we do comply with the law.
right, so the target utilization is the 90 to 100 then?
Understood.
Okay, unless, of course, we've got it backwards because it's 9:55.
I do believe, though, that Ms. Watts did want to vote separately on number 2.
Yes. So, Dr. Liu, do you want to make the motion and then?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I will make the motion. I move to amend page 2 of 12, B.1.E to read location of regional programs. And April, that is motion number 2. I sent in the email earlier today.
A second?
Yes. Okay, so I have a motion by Dr. Liu and a second by Dr. Wu to move to amend page 2 of 12, B.1.E to read location of regional programs. Ms. Delmont Small,
Yes?
Mr. Banez,
Abstain.
Dr. Liu,
Yes.
Ms. Mallow,
Oh, sorry, no.
Ms. Mosley,
No.
Ms. Watts,
No.
Dr. Wu,
Yes.
Ms. Catronio.
No.
Motion fails 3-4-1.
Do you have more motions or that's all?
Ms. Catronio, I have my hand up. May I go?
Yep, you're the first one.
I move approval of policy 6010.
Was
Second.
amended? Was amended?
As amended.
As amended.
As amended.
Was there a second?
I second? Somebody else?
Antonia.
Antonio second.
So to be clear, this includes this whole capacity utilization, target utilization.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
If I may, I thought there was still outstanding disagreement for page 2 of 12, number A3, on whether that should include the lower bound. Had we determined that? That was ironed out?
I believe Mr. Banez is correct. I think we were leaning towards keeping the entire range.
We're all good with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with from 90 to 110 for the prom, and also the target is from 90 to 100%. So I just want to make sure it's 100%. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we're fine with that because I did have motions for that.
Consensus?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so I have a motion by Ms. Mallow and a second by Ms. Watts to move approval of policy 6010, school attendance areas as amended.
Can I have a clarification? Does this include the number 3 attendance? Because I don't think we had consensus on that either, the attendance area committee?
That was not.
Yeah, we did. The third motion?
We did.
We did.
We had consensus to not include it.
Okay, thank you. So this is not included on this. I just want to make sure that that's clear. Okay. Thank you.
Are you ready for the vote? Ms. Delmont Small,
Pass.
Mr. Banez,
Yes, and this language is going to be emailed to the policy committee to approve, right? Since you guys are working at the technicalities? No?
Oh, I hold on.
That's what I thought. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yes, great.
I was confused.
okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Banez, what was that?
Well, point of order. So what do we mean by the policy committee approves it?
When the board makes votes in abstract, then the policy office works out the technical wording, sends it to us. If it aligns with the board's intent, then we just say green light.
Okay.
I can forward it to everyone so everyone's on the same page.
Dr. Banyas?
Yes.
Dr. Liu?
Yes.
Ms. Mallow?
Yes.
Ms. Mosley?
Yes.
Ms. Watts?
Yes.
Dr. Wu?
Yes.
Ms. Catronio?
Yes.
Question, Ms. Delmont Small passed. Do
Right,
I-
you come back to me.
Okay, Ms. Delmont Small?
Yes.
Motion carries 8-0.
Thank you, Ms. Babenko and Mr. Rogers and Mr. Lubley and Mr. Washington and Ms. Bolak, say your name wrong, for all of your work and collaboration on the fly here. Really appreciate. I know this has been a long time coming, and for all of the people who worked on the policy committee for this. So thank you.
Thank you.